Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francescagraham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started. All right, welcome back, Star Chamber listeners, for our first episode that we have the great honor to actually have some guests on the show. I'll introduce those guests in a couple minutes after I kind of give a brief background on what we're going to be covering during this episode. So, the topic of this episode is the Red Hill fuel disaster. So, the Red Hill fuel spills of 2021 involved 3 different significant incidents at the U.S. Navy's Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility near Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which resulted in extensive environmental and public health impacts. The first one, although we actually don't read about this inside of the DoDIG's report that we'll reference a little bit later, was an event that occurred in January of 2021 when it was confirmed that the defuel pipeline at Hotel Pier, Pearl Harbor's deep draft pier, was leaking various fuel products, including jet fuel and marine diesel, into the ground and the ocean. Ultimately, this fuel spill resulted in about 7,000 gallons of fuel released into Pearl Harbor over a period of time. The Navy, maybe not surprisingly, refused to acknowledge that spill was an active spill, and it was not reported to the authorities, probably even including the state of Hawaii, but who knows? Likely, and stated it was a historical contamination from World War II. So the Navy says. But I think there's at least like a 50 or 60 or 70 year difference between World War II and 2021, but we will not go there. Actually, I just did. So after January of 2021, then in May of 2021, there was a second incident at the Red Hill Lower Access Tunnel, which is over Oahu's sole source drinking water aquifer, which, if those of you who don't know what an aquifer is, in very layman's terms, also known as my brief research prior to this podcast, is essentially an underground river, which we can then drill into in order to get fresh drinking water. So there was a spill occurred in May of 2021, which the Navy states released 19,000 gallons of jet fuel, and that this spill, these 19,000 gallons, was contained and collected into the fire suppression retention line. So essentially, the Navy says, well, that fuel was contained inside the facility. It never went into the water. However, eyewitness accounts state that, on the contrary, the fuel was not contained and was released into the ground above the aquifer, which then allowed the fuel to seep from the top of the ground into the aquifer, the fresh drinking water supply, below inside the aquifer, while other portions of that fuel was collected into the fire suppression retention line, where, in November 2021, it spilled. Now, November 2021, an estimated 14,000 gallons of fuel leaked from an overhead pipeline, where portion had gone in May of 2021 spill, contaminating the Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam community water system. The contamination affected the drinking water supply and impacted thousands of military families and local residents. Did they tell the state of Hawaii about this fuel spill right away, Ryan? No,
they did not.
Of course not. So, after about a week and a half, nor their own people or their families, small children involved, included babies, infants. So after about 2 weeks, the Navy started receiving complaints of fuel-like odors health issues and water discoloration. And after they started receiving these complaints from local residents on the military base, that is when they decided to start an investigation. Not prior, not from from the January 2021 spill, which was something that happened in World War II, 70 something years ago, not from the May spill, and certainly not initially triggered as a result of the November spill. It was only because they started receiving phone calls. So in December of 2021, the Department of Defense Inspector General system initiates an investigation. 3 years later, on November 8th, 2024,
3 years.
3 years, the results of that investigation were published, which we'll get into a little bit of the details of that later and our impression of the fantastic, sarcasm, job that the Department of Defense IG did in collusion, potentially, we'll say, with the U.S. Navy to discount all leadership from any leadership responsibility. But that's a spoiler alert, and I apologize to that. So the Red Hill fuel disaster spills of 2021, all three of them, they did have a significant impact on the local population in Hawaii, as well as, of course, military members and their families. There were approximately 93,000 individuals that were impacted by the contamination of the water system. This system served military personnel, their families, civilian residents. So when we say impacted, what do we mean by that? Health implications, first and foremost. There were approximately just shy of, we'll say, 7,000 people, military and civilian, including infants, who experienced and continue to experience a series of incredibly serious medical problems as a result of these fuel spills, and more importantly, not just as a result of the spills themselves, because stuff happens, but more importantly, because the Navy did not immediately notify the residents, military and civilian, that the fuel spills occurred. So you had, for roughly a week to 2 weeks, you had parents bathing their small children in water that had been contaminated by jet fuel, drinking water that had been contaminated by jet fuel, and using plastics that jet fuel had seeped into, pacifiers, these types of things. Result being that you have a number of people, varying degrees of health issues, but one that sticks out to me especially are children, infants who are not born with any sort of cognitive difficulties, who now have permanent cognitive impairments as a result of this fuel spill that the Navy leadership did not tell the right people about. The other major event is that due to the lack of access to fresh water, approximately 1,000 military families were forced to relocate from their homes to temporary accommodations, such as hotels and other non-permanent areas, due to the unsafe water conditions. And as we'll hear from one of our guests as we move into the podcast, she, her husband, and her two small children had to live in a hotel for approximately 6 months due to no longer being able to reside at their residence. So that's just an overview of what we're going to be talking about, specifically talking about the failures of the United States Navy to properly handle what accidents happen, but to properly execute their leadership responsibilities, to notify, to care, and to take care of their people and the residents of Hawaii after 19,000 gallons of fuel were spilled into the drinking water system.
Not to mention the active collusion for the cover-up that involved at least the Navy and the DODIG. And now we're receiving reports of likely collusion with the Department of Justice to keep it all under wraps as well.
Exactly. So a huge issue. And why are we talking about it on this show, Ryan?
Yeah, great recap, Cheskin. Good morning. How are you?
I am just wonderful. How are you doing?
Well, I'm not so wonderful because this story frankly disgusts me on several levels. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you why people should care and we should really pay attention to this, because I believe that in the future, when the Francescagrahams and Ryan Swayzes of 2060 are going through their professional military education, Red Hill will be a case study in the betrayal of our service members and their families. I vehemently believe that. I look at military history, and especially American military history, at kind of a macro level. We have the greatest generation. They fought in two wars, really, World War II, and then towards the tail end of that generation, the Korean War. Then we fought the Cold War. We had what many would say the embarrassment of the defeat in Vietnam. We had a nation turn on its own service members, not only through medical issues, but also just the sense of you all are baby killers and you fought in an unjust war.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the Reagan period where we had a recoupment of the military to include the trust that the nation had in its military, followed by Desert Storm, followed by our longest wars, the wars on terror. And I wonder how historians will look at this period of time, the post-global war on terror period, when they see things like service members who have spent years trying to get disability pay for things like burn pits, which had been things for 30 years plus.
We were kept denying.
And kept denying. We look at Camp Lejeune and the PACT Act of 2022, how that took 3+ decades for our country to admit fault. I surmise we will look at this period, historians will look at this period as a period of betrayal, especially when you look at the sacrifices that service members have made over the last 2 decades in our longest wars, some would argue fruitless wars.
Many would argue.
Many would argue, including myself.
Myself as well. And the Iraqis and the Afghanis probably too.
Also, only to return to a country that parades around saying support our troops and people are our most valuable asset. But then to watch something like Red Hill play out, where as soon as someone raises the red flag, as soon as there's something which the government was clearly at fault for, how that same Department of Defense, with complicit actors such as the Department of Justice, circle the wagons to discount and defame anybody who brings the truth to them, and or circles the wagons so as to not admit culpability and ensure people who are due restitution don't get it. I think this event will be, poorly selected term here, a shining example of this period of betrayal. And that's why I'm so, the word is incorrect, enthusiastic, but I'm so enthusiastic to get this story out because I just think it's so important, not only for service members, but for the American public, and especially those who would consider serving in the future to know.
And I think that's important what you just now said. We're excited to get this story out because I would not be surprised if many of our listeners have never even heard of the Red Hill fuel disaster, because the Department of Defense and the U.S. government have been so fantastically good at keeping this thing under wraps.
There's been very, very limited national press coverage. It's mostly been limited to local Hawaiian news. There was one exception, that was a 60 Minutes piece done in the fall of 2024, which hit on some of the issues, hit on some of the cover-up, but not nearly as in depth as what you and I know to likely have had happen.
And what our listeners will know very soon. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 2 guests. And before I do that, I just want to read a quick disclaimer for our guests. So, both of our guests are actually still active duty serving military. One is in the Navy and one is in the Army. And so I just want to be clear, disclaimer alert, the opinions and views expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not represent the official policies, positions, or endorsements of the United States Army, United States Navy, the Department of Defense, or any other government entity. This discussion is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as reflecting the official stance of any military or governmental organization. So, with that done, suck it, Poindexters. Suck it, Poindexters. Yeah. With that done, I'd like to quickly introduce our 2 guests. Our first guest is Lieutenant Commander Shannon Bentz. She is, as I said, an active duty Navy officer. She's been in the Navy for just shy of 20 years, and she was serving on the Red Hill bulk fuel facility as one of the senior engineer / supply officers at the facility. So she had firsthand knowledge of the issues that abounded at the facility even prior than to her arriving. And she also was the person who first raised the red flag about the issues at the facility. And we'll hear her story, the issues, and what she's experienced since she reported this. Our second guest is Major Mandy Feint. She is an active duty Army officer. Her specialty is administration, and she and her family were living on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. And they were stationed there. They were serving with the Special Operations Command that is stationed there. And we're going to speak with her and really hear from her the impact of the spill itself and then the subsequent Navy's cover-up of the spill and the Department of Defense's continued dismissal of the issues that we truly know exist.
Yeah, and before that, I'm going to get on my soapbox, something I rarely do on this podcast, but this is a special episode in many respects. First and foremost, if you know anything about Francesca's story and my story, it's similar in nature. So we can say to both of you, in my opinion, you're both heroes. It takes an inordinate amount of moral courage to do what you both did, still do it on active duty, and see it through. Mm-hmm. And that's coming from a very personal place in my heart, having done something similar. To watch the system fail you, to watch your chain of command fail you, the Inspector General system fail you. Probably there was Congress involved in those failures as well. And maybe most painful is your colleagues and friends who are supposed to be your battle buddies, shipmates, wingmen. When the heat is on, you see how they cower as well. But it's a tough road to hoe, for sure. It's fascinating to me that the military very much encourages and rewards courage and valor, but only in certain circumstances. If you go off to war and you're under fire from the enemy, they name a street or a school after you. But if you stand up for what's right and you speak the truth, but it goes against the narrative, it goes against the institution, then you're a boat rocker, a troublemaker, an extremist, a conspirator. I've heard it all. We've heard it all. You've heard it all. Mm-hmm. But you stood and fought when so many, I'm sure in your personal stories, as was the case for ours, did not stand the fight. So bravo to both of you for doing this. It's impressive, and that's why I'm so excited about this show, although the subject matter itself is not so pleasant. I'm glad to have both of you, glad to know both of you. I'm proud to know both of you, and I thank both of you for coming on.
And with that, I will turn it over first to Shannon to give a little bit more fuller introduction of herself.
All right. Thank you for having us. Just some background on me. I'm a supply corps officer. I started out as enlisted in the United States Navy. And then after a few years, I put in an officer package for supply corps officer, which is the business managers of the Navy. So we deal with millions of dollars of buying parts or food or whatever it is to sustain the force. So I go in, baby ensign, go to a cruiser, assigned on my first ship as officer, all male crew, only 3 females, did really well, put in a package for one of the first women on submarines. And then again, went to an all male crew to then integrate that crew. And these are all nominated billets. So I had an interview with the 4-star admiral at the time, Admiral Richardson, who then became the CNO and at the time. And then after I had a successful tour on USS Florida, SSGN, guided missile submarine, I went to Millington, Tennessee, did more detailing, helped other officers get detailed to other jobs throughout the United States Navy. So I learned a lot there. And subsequently got nominated and put a package in to go to University of Kansas, which is a Civens program for officers where the Navy pays for your graduate master's degree. So I got selected to go get a petroleum management degree at University of Kansas, spent a couple of years there doing business and engineering management. And that's where times kind of turned, and I interviewed actually a couple officers to get to Red Hill. And subsequently, I got detailed to the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility, also known as Red Hill, or also Defense Fuel Support Point, Pearl Harbor. So there's a few different names we call it. However, is referred to as Red Hill, and it stored up to 250 million gallons of fuel. And that's how I end up at Red Hill. I was assigned as the fuel director overall in charge of the facility. And again, you can see the theme. I was assigned as one of only a couple females at the facility. Most of the workers there were male, and I had 105 employees under me.
All right, Shannon, I really appreciate that introduction. And now we'll turn the mic over to our second guest, Major Mandy Feit. Mandy, over to you.
All righty. Thank you also for having Shannon and I on. I'm Mandy Feit, starting off by saying that I do not have a fuels background at all. In fact, I am a human resources officer in the military. I'm a joint qualified adjutant general officer, which is senior human resources officer in the Army. I've been affiliated with the Army for about 23 years. I did a short stint in the Virginia Army National Guard when I was in college, and I've been serving on active duty as an officer for almost 19 years now. I've served in multiple leadership positions throughout my career. I was a launcher platoon leader when I first came in the Army as an air defense artillery officer. And then when I became a captain, I sort of transitioned over to the Adjutant General Corps, where I've served in, every echelon of command from battalion to division as the senior human resources officer. And also in joint command, so I'm a joint qualified officer. I've served for Special Operations Command and recently with NORTHCOM. I was deployed with and served as a former company commander in the 82nd Airborne Division. I was a recruiter and an ROTC instructor at a college here in Virginia, George Mason University, in a nominative position. Also, in addition to my primary duties in the military, I'm a nationally certified master resiliency trainer and a sexual assault victim advocate, where I've served as a victim advocate in the military for several years now. I have several overseas tours, obviously Korea and Hawaii, and then in Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And most recently, I'm one of 93,000 people impacted by the Red Hill water crisis. When I was stationed in Hawaii, serving in a nominative position as the Deputy J1 for Special Operations Command Pacific. I was living in Hawaii with my family. My husband is a civilian. He's not at all military related. He's an amazing military spouse in the golf industry, serving as a PGA golf professional. We brought over two young but super healthy kiddos, Palmer and Trip. They were 3 months old and about 2.5 when we moved to Hawaii, and 1 and 3 when they started being exposed to the jet fuel. So that's how I came to be in Hawaii. That's a little bit about me.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan, Shannon, and Mandy. Now we're going to get into the meat of the interview, where we are in time. So May 2021, there was approximately 19,000 gallons of jet fuel that went missing. And no investigation was started. I think I forgot to say that earlier, but that should kind of cause people's ears to prick up a little bit. 19,000 gallons of jet fuel went missing. No investigation was started. Nothing else was done. Now, in November 2021, a spill occurs. That spill is part of that 19,000 gallons that went missing. It's approximately 14,000 gallons of jet fuel leaked from an overhead pipeline, contaminating the Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam Community Water System. Now, Shannon, I'd like to hear from you first. As one of the senior officers that was stationed there at the Red Hill bulk fuel facility, describe to us your thoughts when you first arrived on station and then moving forward through to this May 2021 to November 2021 period.
Yeah, so I got there to Red Hill in May of 2020 during COVID. So traveling to Hawaii or anywhere was extremely difficult. And then once I stepped into the facility, I turned over with the prior commander in charge. Everything was glorious. Everything was above standards, meeting the state and federal laws. And the facility is huge. It runs over to Halava Valley, which is a few miles north of Pearl Harbor, down to Pearl Harbor, over to Hickam Airfield. So it's expansive. It's almost, I explain it to, you think of a Navy captain at 06 being in charge of a naval ship, a vessel in charge of hundreds of people. This facility was massive. It was like 10, 20 times as large. And then I was at 04 in charge. And so walking in the facility after the turnover, I started to see things were just not quite right. And starting with that Red Hill fire suppression system, which is supposed to protect us against fuel fires. you know, a
Mhm.
triple F is the only thing that can smother a fire, not water. Water splatters the fuel. So when I found that the valves were locked out, essentially the system was never working after it was built in from 2015 to 2019. Found out, brought it up to my captain at the time, and I was just absolutely shocked. He said, "Oh, I know." But he didn't tell anybody, including myself. And the prior commander had known. And I said, "Why did you shut it down? Or why was it never working?" "Oh, well, the AFFF was above the aquifer, even though it was built with AFFF. We didn't want the AFFF to inadvertently leak into the aquifer." However, he was throwing myself and all his employees into the facility to run it, knowing that we weren't protected. And then from that point forward, it was just everywhere I turned, it was the facility was falling apart. And then eventually I discovered that fuel was leaking into Pearl Harbor and found out that people had known of it, just didn't make it known in a fuel spill report.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. It's very important here, and I apologize if I'm going to reiterate the obvious or what's already been stated a few times throughout the show, but I think it's critical to keep track of the timeline of events here, especially as it relates to who knew what when. So as soon as Shannon shows up in February of 2021, she starts highlighting the deficiencies for the facility. There's no investigation done. We'll learn how she was retaliated against for making those reports. Fuel goes missing in May of 2021. The DODIG report said that Navy leadership was not informed of that missing fuel. What they omitted in the report, of course, and they'll make several other omissions, was that throughout this time, Shannon was also making reports to the DODIG, the ones eventually tasked with the investigations, 5 months after that fact.
Mm-hmm.
Then the fuel spills in November of 2021, and it's at this point where they essentially come to the conclusion that they can't keep it under wraps anymore. And despite Shannon raising the alarm for months consistently, and them stonewalling her, stalling her, and then eventually retaliating against her, they can't keep what she's been reporting under wraps anymore. They'll keep her under wraps for sure, but the fuel spilled, the horse has left the stable, so to speak. And finally, in December of 2021, nearly a year after Shannon has begun raising issues, is the Department of Defense Inspector General system energized into what would be a nearly 3-year investigation.
Energized, I would like to point out, not because the fuel spill occurred, not because you had this Navy officer raising the red flag for nearly a year, and not because people were being poisoned by jet fuel in their drinking water. They were energized because the public became aware that they were being poisoned by jet fuel, and they started making phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I wanted to just kind of see if you could walk us through a little bit, Ryan, is Shannon, she's an 04. She's a lieutenant commander. She's a relatively junior officer. One would guess that there are a lot of people, Navy personnel at this facility that are more senior ranking than her, who probably knew that this was happening because Shannon, being a professional officer, she undoubtedly told them that there were issues. So what are their motivations, hint, hint, MIC, for not doing anything about what Shannon's been talking about?
So one of the things we always look at in any of our cases and in the DoD at large, especially when it pertains to this issue of the administrative systems of justice, quote unquote, air quotes, you can't see it, but it's air quotes, are motivations, right? Because the question always comes up, well, why would a military do this to its own people? What's the motivation there? And so the question goes to you, Shannon, on the micro level at Red Hill. What were the environmentals there? What motivated people to suppress the truth, motivated them to keep this under wraps?
So after I started reading, again, Red Hill is so well documented. I know the military has the narrative of the opposite, like there's not enough information to understand Red Hill. I saw the opposite. So once you start peeling the onion back, This has been going on for decades. It was not ran well. It was mismanaged by officers that were not fuels trained, that didn't understand how the fuel operation worked, where pipelines led, how to not prevent them from leaking, keep them, have integrity in the system. And so it comes down to my captain and the people at the facility at the time didn't want to be the one holding the buck. They don't want to be stuck with that problem.
And so it's kind of something we talk about during our some of our previous episodes. So you had this long time normalization of deviance.
Nice.
And like you said, your captain, the previous captain, all the other captains did not want to be, like you said, be left holding the buck, because then all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, we never knew this happened.
There's got to be also, okay, let's play the role of captain here who's just arrived. Let's say that person arrives and finds all the deficiencies you do. If they report it right then and there, it's not on them, right? It's like, hey, I just showed up. They have plausible deniability in that. So was there something else from either monetary, contractor side or something which was pressuring the military leadership to keep it on the down low?
Absolutely. So the other side of the problem is these defense contractors. So especially in Hawaii, I've seen it through the commands, especially NAVFAC, NAVSUP, the PAC Fleet, INDOPACOM. When these admirals make or O6 and aboves or admirals retire, guess who the vice presidents of these companies are? It's
so
shocking. Wow,
so good.
Look at our shocked face.
So
wow.
good. So good.
What?
Absolutely.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, according to the Quincy Institute, between June of 2018 and July of 2023, over 80% of high-ranking, i.e. 3- and 4-star officers, took positions as board members, advisors, executives, consultants, or lobbyists for the MIC, for the military-industrial complex, specifically defense contractors or related financial institutions.
So it makes sense for these senior ranking officers not to action anything this junior officer is telling them, because they might be throwing mud in the noses of their future employers. Bit of a conflict of interest there.
Yeah. Yes. Ike was right.
Ike was right. Ike was right.
So aside from the MIC, the military industrial complex, being in bed with the Navy and vice versa, Shannon, in your intro, you talked about the role of gender and the challenges of gender in your upbringing. Was that also playing a role once you started reporting the deficiencies of the facility?
Yeah, absolutely. The crazy thing is that, when I was one of the only females on the ships or the submarine, I got the opposite reaction to the crew. They were super welcoming and treated me very well, like I was smart, or actually willing to teach me. But when I got to the facility, it was a complete different climate where I was one of the, again, only women there. Out of all these males, I was new. I didn't know anything because I hadn't been there a long time. Everything that I said was questioned in front of leadership or at meetings from subordinates that worked for me. So it was really eye-opening to the culture that was overwhelming that place.
I imagine the culture is a lot of ingrained contractors, a lot of people who had been there a long time, a lot of people who did not have plausible deniability should and if the deficiencies be reported, and then it be made known that those deficiencies had existed under their watch for years, if not decades. True?
Yeah, absolutely. And the crazy thing is about them, their backgrounds, especially my fuel director deputy, who claimed he had 40 years of fuels experience. He had experience as Navy enlisted aviation boatswain's mate refueling aircraft. He didn't run fuel facilities, nor did he have, or anybody at the facility have formal petroleum management training or engineering or like fluid dynamics or corrosion, anything like that to actually do the job. So they were just flying by the seat of their pants.
Okay. And this is one of the things that I read in the DODIG report that came out just a couple weeks ago in November, or a couple months ago, maybe on November 8th. is indicative of this culture that Shannon is talking about, is that in May of 2021, remember, I think Shannon, you said you had arrived there in 2020. In May of 2021, approximately 20,000 gallons of fuel went, quote unquote, missing. And I don't know how, I don't know how that was not a cause.
Where'd it go?
Where'd it go? I don't know how that was not a cause of an investigation. I don't know how that was not a cause of just anything, but no investigation occurred. I'm certain it was reported that this fuel is not there. And in the DODIG report, this word that I think all of us who are in this type of field hate was used was, well, it was just assumed it was missing. Meanwhile, that was the fuel that was sitting in the pipes that then later in November 2021 poisoned the group out in Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam.
Yeah, and 20,000 gallons of fuel had gone, quote, missing. Again, this is November 2021. I can't overemphasize this. It's now November. We're taping this in December of 2024. The Department of Defense IG report on the mishap came out last month, 3 years after that fuel went missing, and oddly a week after an election. But let's not speculate on that. Let's go to the people who know what they're talking about. Shannon, so you have 20,000 gallons of fuel missing. You show up and go, where's the fuel? Now what happens?
Where'd the fuel go? Okay.
Yep.
So,
where'd it go?
So back May 6th, the fuel spill occurred. The day prior, I had just filed an Article 138 complaint against my CO, which is a wrong against the commanding officer, because since actually February, I'd started to file the Inspector General reports of the wrongdoings and the laws that were being broken, the state and federal laws.
This is February of 2021?
2021. And
okay.
So to give a little context, there's an active fuel spill going on into Pearl Harbor, up to 7,000 gallons already. And so these effects of bad decision are cascading into Red Hill. And then the May 6th spill occurred because they had removed my leadership. Essentially, my commanding officer found out I made Inspector General report because I have to submit a wrong against my CO. Basically, I have to go to my Navy captain as part of the procedure and say to my abuser, you wronged me. And then,
my God. What is that? Is that a Navy thing?
That is a Navy thing. It's a requirement. In order to file your complaint at the lowest level. So I was outed.
God, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Navy, you guys are terrible.
Oh, right.
Sorry, that is new to me.
I love
that's
Shannon,
a new bar.
but I also think the Navy is terrible.
No,
Wow,
the Navy's
that
not
is a
terrible.
new bar. Go to your captor and tell him how your conditions are. Okay, so you go to your boss and you go, I just filed an IG complaint on you. Here's a donut.
And denied. My complaint was forwarded up to the next flag in charge. So following day, they had a catastrophe because they removed me from my job unofficially for the past few months. And people were running amok in the facility, didn't know what they were doing. So the spill had happened. So I immediately went the next day and grabbed the inventory logs of where the fuel went from the tanks. We were moving fuel from a surge tank 2 to fill tank 20, which is about 11 million gallons of fuel. And we have to move it down from another tank 12. So it's this big evolution. It's a closed system. So there's no way the fuel should just leak out unless there's something that happened. And that happened through the pipeline breaking to a pressure surge. And so there was way more than 19,000 gallons missing. I have the original logs. What ended up happening is the Navy removed me from my position again, but started hiding me around the island. And then with that, they hid all the knowledge and hid me from the investigators. And I didn't speak to any investigators until the Kavanaugh report, in which I had to still file another Inspector General report for the investigators to speak to me and or know where I was located.
Okay, wow. All right, so that's all transpiring in mid 2021. Was or were the IG reports that were just released 3+ years after the fact a result of issues you had brought to their attention, or was it just obfuscated and suppressed until people started getting sick and they couldn't keep it under wraps anymore? Do you know what that link was?
Yeah, so I would say I made hundreds of complaints, not just the Navy IG, the DoD IG, my command, Congress, the EPA, EPA CID, NCIS, DCIS. I mean, you name it, the state, everyone failed. Hundreds and hundreds of complaints. Everyone had the information to stop this and prevent the November catastrophe and know where the fuel went. Not only did they spill fuel, but after the May event, my people, I saw them, they're flushing water with fire hoses to wash away the fuel. And so there's this narrative of just from the Navy and now the DoD IG that there's only 19,000 gallons that has spilled. What about the water and what about everything else that went down the drain? Nobody, it's like they grabbed a number, stuck with it, and not changing it.
So Shannon, you said you made hundreds of complaints to dozens of agencies. You also said that you were filing complaints with the Department of Defense IG system as early as 2021. Did anyone respond substantively? Did anybody react, interview you at the outset? And then as a second part of that question, after the spills occur and the DoD IG is ordered to carry out an investigation in December of 2021, i.e. 10 months after your initial complaints, do they ever interview you? Are you ever contacted as the subject matter expert / director of the facility?
I went to the DoD IG. They kept trying to push them back to the Navy, and so that was a struggle trying to keep it at the DoD IG. And then eventually I was able to get an interview with the DCIS and NCIS investigators, who then spent a significant amount of time digesting what I was telling them and the documents, a significant documentation I had transferred them, and then they were able to rope in EPA CID, EPA Region 9, the Hawaii Attorney General's Office, the state regulators, Department of Health, and OSHA, and it kind of spiraled from there. But at that time, while they were listening, they were not urgently trying to solve the problem and stop any corruption and or spills from occurring. So while it was gaining visibility, I was still at a roadblock, and then the November 21 spill occurred. And obviously all these complaints did not stop what I thought they could stop, these significant hazards from being impeded onto the community and the employees within the Navy working within the Red Hills system. And basically the dangers didn't stop. They didn't come in and save the day. And when the November 21 spills occurred, I was actually able to make more IG to tip off the Pacific Fleet Inspector General, so I could at least be investigated or provide interviews for the investigation, in which another command investigation within the Navy was started. So, but they were through all the command investigations that I was interviewed for, they tried to exclude me and or hide me and pretend I didn't exist throughout this entire period, at least on the Navy command investigations. And there was even some command investigations in which they didn't even reach out to me at all. So that was intentional. And then I was able to reach out to the Air Force's Pacific, Army Pacific, the 25th ID, and all these 4-star commands for the other services. I was able to at least make IG reports with them and tip them off that, hey, don't listen to Navy. They don't have the whole story. This is what's really going on with the fuel in the water, and you need to protect your people, and this is why, and this is how. So while they didn't have jurisdiction to do anything, because I was a Navy employee, a Navy officer, they didn't have jurisdiction to take action on my reporting. So I had to go back to the Navy, the Pacific Fleet, and hope that they would come and talk to me. Subsequently, they did, to interview me, but it was still very restrictive, in which they would let me somewhat provide documents and things like that. They were not entirely honest, in the sense that when they wouldn't let me write my own statement. They recorded about 4 hours of interviews with me and then summarized it into 3 or 4 pages, and then wanted me to sign it saying that that was my statement, and they would refuse to let me write my own statement and sign it. I actually had a Navy captain that certified and verified my statement was accurate, which was never happened in my entire career. However, once I want to say once I got out of the Navy IG system into the DoD IG in Congress, I was able to make more stride. However, the DoD IG system still failed, in which I'm still waiting on retaliation investigations to complete 4 years later.
4 years, jeez.
And not only did I make reports to all these Department of Defense agencies, I made reports to the Department of Labor, the Office of Special Counsel, the FBI, you name it, I made a complaint. However, all these civilian agencies deferred back to the military because I'm under UCMJ, and they are not taking action on military affairs. So again, like, all these eyes on the problem, and there was just a lot of red tape to move ahead.
Wow.
And I just want to read, this is up on the beginning pages of the DoD-IG report. When I was reading this, the 2 words that I took from the DoD-IG report was cop-out, and I think I mentioned that. So the DoD-IG, their summation of why all of this occurred is because the Navy officials lacked sufficient understanding of the Red Hill BFSF, forgive me, Shannon, for not knowing, and the Red Hill well. Specifically, they were not sufficiently aware of the roles, responsibilities, and requirements for owners and operators of community water systems. One could say that's inaccurate. Were not trained on emergency response plan roles and responsibilities. That should be inaccurate. And did not exercise the emergency response plan. So really, if I were to take that whole report, I would say, okay, the accidents happen, first and foremost. We know that accidents happen. Even if we, say, okay, Shannon, go somewhere else on the island. You're the expert that we hand selected to come to this position after getting you a master's degree and you being trained by nuclear physicists at Kansas. No big deal. Go sit somewhere and hand out towels at the gym. Even if we say that, and then this accident happens, what the DoD-IG and the Navy writ large is failing to acknowledge is that after these accidents happened, the leadership response is to cover it up. And then to defame Shannon.
Absolutely. And at the time, it was ruled by committee. They knew the rules. They knew the response plans. They knew who was in charge. The failure was the military ranking system, where you always outranked and someone is always in charge of you. And so they think that despite all the training, and they have the final call, not you.
And so what then happened, Shannon? So now we're in November, and the fuel has been, if I'm remembering it correctly, the fuel has been sitting in these pipes since May. So what happened in November that then led to the catastrophe that we call the Red Hill water crisis?
Yeah, so again, like, at the moment of the May spill, we had known that the fuel had gone into the sumps. Part of it went into the fire suppression system. That's just how the system was made. It was a bad design. There was also fuel oil reclaim. So there's another parallel system, 2 tanks, 2 different systems, but it was both sucking up fuel. And so they knew where it went, but I think the chaos and them removing me and removing most of the knowledge of where things were and how things operated in the systems, and just that education engineering piece of it, of me knowing how the system worked, they got into, I don't know, cover up mode. Hey, how are we going to resolve this to our leadership? And we're just going to clean up the tunnels and pretend it never happened. And I mean, at the time, again, to put more things in context, I had to force them to report the May spill to the state and to the federal officials because they were trying to not report it. And it was just a minor incident in their eyes. And so again, like from May to November, it was just sitting there until an operator was operating a train within the tunnel, and it hit a low point of the drooping pipeline of the fire suppression retention line that was drooping, which was again made out of PVC and substandard parts. It was supposed to be stainless steel. If it was stainless steel, it would never have sagged. So it was just, again, these cascading events and failures that led to this giant catastrophe.
And so then the train operator hits the pipe. How many gallons of fuel leaked into the water supply?
So the Navy sticks and go back. Navy and the DODIG state 19,000 gallons, but by the logs I've seen, I mean, there was over 400,000 gallons of fuel missing on the log.
Oh my God.
So where'd that go? And then where the water that washed that fuel down the tunnel system, where'd that water go? Nobody mentions the water.
Hey, just for the layman, give me an idea of the size of a facility that would house 400,000 gallons. Give me a concrete kind of visual. What size is it? A ship? Is it multiple ships? What's 400,000 gallons?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm a little rusty on my ship fuel tank sizes, but I would say a small naval vessel like a cruiser would probably house several 100,000 gallons of fuel.
Okay, so one Navy ship worth of fuel was dumped.
Jet fuel.
So I'm going to skip ahead, if you don't mind. We'll get back to connecting the dots in a little bit. But one thing that's fascinated me, I'm going to open this up to Mandy. One thing that's fascinated me throughout this whole saga, when I first started learning, Shannon, when you and I first met, we first started talking about, is how little we've heard of this issue, especially as you Hawaiianers, I don't know if that's the right demonym, as you people on Hawaii say on the mainland, how little of this still in the news has made it to the lower 48, how well it's been suppressed. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but how this story on several levels has been kept under wraps.
One of the interesting little tidbits of information that we gathered during our advocacy work this past summer, 2024, when we were engaging with members of the Senate Armed Services Committee staffers to talk about our proposal to create some fairness within the Department of Defense by entirely revamping the Inspector General system by having an independent Inspector General from the organization, is we were talking to one of the staffers, and she said something very interesting, and that was that in relation to the fairest doctrine, in relation to fairness within the system and giving service members more rights, the number one hindrance to that is at the time, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Lindsey Graham. And at least from what she was telling me, the short answer to him is, we can't have another Camp Lejeune. And what she means by that, what she's saying that Senator Graham is saying by that is, no, we can't give service members the right to sue. No, we can't give service members more rights, because if they do, all the personal injury lawyers will come out of the woodwork and sue the government. So it has nothing to do with the actual justice of the service members. It has nothing to do with any sort of recompense or recovery for the faults of the Department of Defense or the Coast Guard and their abuse of service members. It has nothing to do with that. It has, we don't want to give more jobs to personal injury lawyers so they can sue the government.
So we'll only care about you and care for you and your families so long as it doesn't cost us money. Got it.
Got it.
So, Mandy, when you were going through your whistleblower journey, talk to me about the pressures you saw, felt, observed, etc., that have contributed to the military institutions successfully, by and large, suppressing the story and what really happened on Red Hill.
So it's funny that you mentioned Camp Lejeune. This is what happened at Red Hill is a mirror image of what happened at Lejeune. I was very young when Camp Lejeune happened, admitting my own ignorance. I didn't know much about it. But immediately after this water crisis made national news, the faces of the case of Red Hill, or excuse me, of Camp Lejeune, or the folks who became the outspoken advocates, Jerry Ensminger being one of them, Mike Partain being another, immediately reached out to us. I have flown out to Camp Lejeune. I've met both of these gentlemen multiple times. I've looked at the documents that were produced from the Navy as part of their water crisis. And it is, seeing the documents that the Navy has produced here at Red Hill, it is as if they pulled a page from their playbook and the messaging, the downplaying the significance, the amount of effort, money that has been put into messaging this to suppress it has been unreal to me. It, like I said, it's been a mirror image. I'm not the only outspoken advocate. I've done, over 100 interviews. It's not for lack of the people of Hawaii and the impacted families doing interviews and speaking out about this. But the Navy has done, they're a powerful source. The DoD has an endless amount of money, and we've actually, the communications campaign has been leaked to the press. They have spent a lot of time and effort to suppress this water crisis and to downplay the significance of it. The same Navy who is responsible for this crisis has been the same entity in charge of the water testing, of the medical testing and care, of the remediation, of the communication, and of the accountability. And for so long, for this many years, the Navy, being the fox, has been allowed to guard the hen house. And to see all of that, the only word that I have for it is corruption. What has happened is beyond corrupt. And I never thought I'd see the day, huge patriot of this country, have loved the military, never have been a walking billboard for the military. Sold the story, they say, I've made the Kool-Aid, I've drank the Kool-Aid, I've sold the Kool-Aid, especially as a recruiter. I feel now that I've done a lot of people a disservice because I didn't know this side of the military.
Mandy and Shannon, there are so many aspects of your story that resonate with us. But one of the most difficult ones to grapple with, for me, for Francesca, I'm sure, for both of us still, is exactly what you just said. How naive you realize you were, and how the military you served and urged others to serve took and still takes advantage of your trust and naivete. And furthermore, it seems like in the investigation, and both of you can answer this, that during the IG's investigation, they basically took the Navy at its word, especially when it's regarding the severity of the leak and the potential impacts thereof. True?
Yes, absolutely. And again, don't forget those defense contractors with their Navy retired buddies as the vice presidents, because they're the ones going and testing the water, going and supposedly maintaining these facilities. And they're just taking the money and not doing it, and or hiring subcontractors that are not qualified to do the job.
And speaking of self-protectionism, here's the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Meredith Berger, in a November 2023 interview with 60 Minutes, special, which aired in August of 2024. Berger, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment / Chief Sustainability Officer, placed on the hot seat about the Navy's actions, or lack thereof, leading up to and following the spills. Markedly absent in the interview is the Secretary of the Navy himself, Carlos del Toro, who had infamously stated months before, well, let's just play the clip.
It's not the fuel itself that's making them sick. It's the fuel in the water that's making them sick.
Now, after that PR act of clownery, the Navy evidently elected to keep him away from the camera and instead sent in their fall woman, Miss Honorable Berger, who is fairly not in a position to answer some of the questions, and for others, completely out of her depth. Let's listen to her.
But it took 2 years before the Navy issued disciplinary letters to 14 officers involved in the spill response, including 5 admirals. Was anyone fired because of this?
At the time that the accountability came through, we had officers that had already retired, and so they had already separated from service.
Which is, of course, at best, a half-truth. Yes, the base commander had retired, but there was a marked lack of accountability for most officers and contractors who knew of the spill years before the incidents of 2021. And Shannon already covered that, talked about that in our first episode that aired a couple weeks ago. In the end, 12 officers were reprimanded. But let's talk a little bit about what those reprimands were. So, Secretary
Accountability, air quotes.
Accountability. Now, does that accountability include administratively separating with other than honorable discharge so you can't get a job at McDonald's, like what would happen to an E5? Absolutely not.
Or what happened to a whistleblower?
Oh, yeah. Or to whistleblowers, yep. Or to people who, report that they were sexually assaulted. Nope. Okay, back here we go. So the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, issued 3 letters of censure to retired Navy flag officers over the fuel leak at Red Hill Bulk Storage Facility. That's a quote. Also, several letters of instruction were issued to 2 other flag officers.
Oh, boy, that really stings. A letter of censure.
It does, especially when those letters of censure, for those of you who are not either in the Navy or in the military at large. First of all, those officers were retired, so they literally mean nothing. Second of all,
literally,
quite literally, because they're not going to impact their future promotion in the Navy since they are not in the Navy anymore. They're not going to impact their ability to pull their retirement pay, and it's not going to impact their ability to submit their VA claim for 100% disability for God knows what.
For fuel leaks.
For fuel leaks. I almost cussed just now. For fuel leaks, because of course the VA is a separate organization. So those letters of censure mean literally nothing. And the letter of instructions, we don't even know if those went into those active duty officers.
I think those are make-believe.
Those are totally make-believe. 1,000%.
Yeah, and further, we hear this claim of plausible deniability, but all Articles 138, which Shannon had submitted well prior to this, per regulation, they go to the Secretary of the Navy for adjudication. So they absolutely knew what was going on years before this.
Yep.
And
even before they fired her.
Yeah, even before they committed reprisal.
Yeah.
All those facts are markedly absent in the DODIG's report.
Markedly.
Meredith Berger is an assistant secretary of the Navy. We met her at the Pentagon in November. She told us the Navy has been accountable.
We're talking about 20,000 gallons of fuel leak, 90,000 people had their water contaminated. It looks like people retired or were reassigned and no one was fired. How is that accountability? It's accountability within the system that we have established.
Brava, Madam Assistant Secretary. Brava. We could not have said it better ourselves. You held people accountable within the system you have established. And it's now painfully obvious to all of us what that system's true function is. It's not protecting service members. It's not protecting their families. It's not protecting citizens near your bases. It's protecting yourselves, the corrupt leadership of the U.S. Navy. Of course, one of the grand ironies in all this is that the person in the Navy who was fired / held accountable, like really held accountable in a sense, at least was fired and removed from her position, was the person who did the right thing. Did they fire the people who knew of the deficiencies? No.
Nope.
Did they fire the people who covered the deficiencies up?
No.
No. Did they fire Navy leadership who attempted to obfuscate the severity of the spill? Nope.
No.
Who did they fire? Commander Shannon Bent, the one person who at every turn did the right, moral, and just thing. And is any of that in the DODIG report?
Hell no.
Also no. Corruption is at its finest. Well done, U.S. Navy. And well done to you, Navy lapdog, the DODIG. Now, as an interesting aside, speaking of letters of censure, Mr. Del Toro was found to have violated the Hatch Act, parading around basically campaigning for President Biden, which is violation of the Hatch Act. And if you want to read more about Secretary Del Toro's violation of the Hatch Act, you can find that. It's cited in our description and is posted on our website. But we'll get into more of Mr. Del Toro's chicanery. For more on that and the ongoing aftermath of the Red Hill fuel spills, to include the impacts on Shannon and Mandy's personal and professional lives.
So on our show today, we have the great honor of welcoming Miss Catherine McClanahan. She is a 30-year spouse of an Air Force Reserve officer, a mom to 3 children, 3 boys specifically, and she has spent her last 30 years supporting her husband in his Air Force career, as well as homeschooling their 3 boys. So obviously, huge task that never ends.
Wow.
There is no end to the day for her. In addition to being a mom and a spouse to Air Force Reserve officer, her and her family were one of the families that were living on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam during the time frame of the 2021 Red Hill fuel spill disasters. So in this podcast, we're going to learn a little bit more about Catherine, and we're also going to learn about Kat's unique journey from wife and mom to advocate and detective here shortly.
/IG.
Exactly. slash IG who couldn't do their IG job. No big deal. But first, Catherine, thank you so much for coming on to our show. It's truly an honor to have you, not just because of your courage to come on the show, but also your courage and your resiliency to do the work that you have done to expose the cover-up of the Red Hill fuel spill disasters. And you've done a ton of very detailed work on this topic. And we're just really, really excited to chat with you about it.
Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate the time that you've given to the Red Hill families.
What she's done, what she's experienced, which is reflective of what thousands have seen and know to be true, is really a story worth telling. So, Kat, thanks for reaching out. Thanks for being a listener of the show. And like Cheska said, I'm going to say it as well. Thanks for having the moral courage to speak out against the corruption and cover-up which has occurred and is occurring. So, Kat, tell us a little bit about yourself.
In general, I'm a homeschool mother who was years ago in my previous lifetime, I had a master's of science in speech pathology and had worked in hospitals for about 10 or 12 years, working with neurologically impaired, but as a speech therapist, a lot with language, speech, and swallowing.
Kat, what brought you to Red Hill And after that, kind of talk us through the events of 2021 and what took you from a speech pathologist, homeschooling mom to a forensic scientist, essentially.
We arrived in Hawaii August 2019 and really say it was a dream location. My husband was nearing the end of his career and we knew, and this opportunity to come to Hawaii, to go to Hawaii had opened, and we jumped on it. We were so excited we're adventuresome, very outdoors type people, and we loved the chance. So we arrived, everything seemed great.
Mm-hmm.
In summer of 21, I started experiencing some unusual symptoms that initially I thought maybe I getting old, had some unusual shortness of breath that seemed to come and go. But 6 or 8 weeks later, my husband started experiencing that same fleeting shortness of breath sensation. And I had begun developing pain, most definitely late summer of 21. And the pain initially started like in one wrist, quickly within days was in both wrists, my neck, and some unusual where just pulling out of a parking lot, I would like say to my husband, whoa, don't move. Like that's too fast of a move. So I believe I was experiencing some unusual symptoms, but I wouldn't have run to a doctor. In early November, had a horrible looking rash and just strange feeling where you think I'm very tired, don't really know why. Had struggled with maybe not really admitting it, but recognizing later as it got worse, difficulty following conversations.
Yeah, and that's something that was standing out to me as you were talking, was you started experiencing these symptoms in May. And that's something that the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense Inspectors General, they're completely ignoring that there were 2 previous spills or incidents prior to November.
Yeah, I can always say I for sure know by August that I had symptoms, but hard to say, was it May or was it August? Honestly, I would lean towards late summer.
So you start feeling these symptoms, and then we all know what happens. November 2021, the official accounting at least, 19,000 gallon spill. We surmise it's far more than that. And then eventually the Navy and military admit to it after some teeth gnashing, 2 weeks, in fact, of it, of obfuscating the truth and obfuscating the severity of the spill, something they still do to this day, we can say beyond a preponderance of the evidence. So that all plays out, Kat. Tell us about what you endeavor upon following those spills.
Thanksgiving week of 21 will, I think, always stand out very vividly in my mind. I remember conversations from Thanksgiving Day. A friend asked me if I wanted to go to Black Friday at the NEX the next day. And I told her, I've just felt so sluggish and hurting and not sleeping. I'm startling awake during the night. I don't know how I'll sleep. I've had what, we kind of term disruptive sleep right now, like a lot since then. But we all had GI issues after Thanksgiving. But of course, you just attribute it to, you ate rich food or something. When the Navy announced something was wrong, actually a young family from another housing unit, one of the first housing units identified as contaminated, they were told their water was unsafe, but ours, we were told, was safe. We lived on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. We were actually bringing that young family over to our house to bathe 4 young children. I was wearing a wrist brace that I would alternate wrist braces because it was a coming and going about this pain. And the mother had reached out to me to say she had just not been feeling well. And it will always kind of haunt me because the baby, she had told me they were actually getting close to referring him out to neurology for what she called staring episodes.
Wow.
And this was her 4th child. She was not new to infants, right? My husband actually left Island the Sunday after Thanksgiving. He had gone to Japan, and within a week, we would talk every 3 days. And that unusual shortness of breath for me had gotten significant enough that I began being concerned. I was a collegiate swimmer, was in excellent physical shape. It was notable, but it wasn't like I felt like shortness of breath, like I'd pass out. Within a week, he called me, and he in this phone conversation, he actually brought up the fact that that weird breathing thing had gone away.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I'm actually concerned because mine's actually gotten worse. And it was worse tonight. I was just sitting here on the sofa reading for an hour, and it was worse. Well, that didn't have anything to do with exercising, right? So the next day, they had white tents where you could go report symptoms, seek medical care. Nothing seemed severe in the house except this weird shortness of breath. The GI issues, they said, would be fleeting. It's not a problem. Just stop drinking the water. But I was concerned about the shortness of breath. So I went to the white tents. Mm-hmm. My neighbor actually was walking there, and I picked her up on the way. And we sat in our car together and spoke to the triage tent people that came up to your car. And I just remember my neighbor saying, what do you mean? She's saying she's short of breath. And the response I got from the military medical staff was, well, we can't help you. You're a civilian.
Despite the fact that you are a military dependent, the military triage teams were turning you away.
Yes, they said, you're not on TRICARE. My husband, it didn't matter that he was in uniform, that he was actually TDY because of his status. He was not on what they refer to as on orders, meaning he's not on TRICARE, medical care. So they suggested they kind of gave me the choice. If you think that it's urgent, you can go to emergency room or your physician. And I didn't think it was an emergency. It would be like, again, I would tell you, it was a fleeting thing. Now we look back, it was when I was in the home for any period of time. But so by the time I've done this for an hour, I'm not feeling it as severely. I have no idea why. But so I called my physician, and that began what I'll just tell you, it was a cascading symptoms and unexplained emergencies that ended, hopefully one day will end.
I'd like to pivot, Kat, for a little bit then. You initially reached out to me and talked about some forensic work you did with the water sampling and some discrepancies with what you were seeing. Talk to me about how you came to that and how you started and how you went about that and what you found.
I began recognizing something was to do with earlier than November 20th. And why are they only focusing? And I then began hearing about this May leak. So I began following up and asking questions with Hawaii Department of Health. What do you know? What happened? And everything at the time, so this is still in early 2022, everything at the time was about the November 20 leak. And then by spring of 22, at this point, we've lived through where my neighbor's water had been one of those that they had called in and had gotten a sample taken by the Navy. And we found out months later that they had thrown those samples away. They never tested them. We've been having to live through this denial. And in March of 2022, I'm still looking for help. And I'm convinced, you remember, I'm a proud military family. I'm still looking for help. We recognize I'm getting worse. They're telling us this was a fleeting thing, and all these symptoms for me are worsening and not going away. I remember very distinctly somebody sent me an interview, and in that interview, it was the Navy Pacific Fleet surgeon, Captain Michael McGinnis, and it said, what is your response to families saying that they're still struggling with symptoms? So this is 4 months after the leak has been announced. And it's as if he didn't miss a beat. No pause, no consideration that maybe they don't have all the facts. He said, we do know that stress manifests as physical symptoms. That's something to consider.
First time we're hearing directly from the U.S. Pacific Fleet's highest ranking doctor and other military officials about how they're responding to the Navy's tainted water crisis. It started more than 3 months ago, and many neighborhoods still have no drinkable water.
And today, military officials held a news conference to talk about how they're responding. Captain Michael McGinnis, surgeon for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, says he's seen reports of families who believe they've been sickened by longer-term illnesses from the fuel-tainted water.
So trying to figure out, is this just me kind of overreacting?
Or is this something real? Medical teams saw 6,000 people during the crisis. Common symptoms included nausea, vomiting, headache, and rash. But McGinnis says the fuel exposure was temporary. Complaints have gone down starting from early December, and no one has been hospitalized for petroleum toxicity.
We have no evidence to suggest that there's ongoing acute exposure or symptoms related to the water distribution system.
Do you think that any of the families are making up their symptoms because of this fuel event?
You know, I would not conjecture that families are making up their complaints. And certainly stress can manifest in physical symptoms. And so that's something to consider.
Oh, it's all in your head. It's all in your head. Kat, it is all in your head.
It's not the fuel itself that's making them sick. It's the fuel in the water that's making them sick.
Exactly. Oh, so good.
And then they say this, and it was when it dawned on me, the DOD is not coming to help us. I was fully convinced until then they're going to help us. I had just been in the ER, and it's that realization that hits you where they're not trying to help. And I really had not believed a lot of this pushback against the Navy initially, because I felt like, no, I know Navy members, and they're honest and admirable people. And these people would do the right thing. We are their people. I still considered myself a military family. This has all been on our medical dime at this point, though. And yet I'm still convinced they're coming to help. They just need to get to the right people. And at that point, it became very clear to me. They're not coming. This is a complete denial that this is in our heads. And at that point, that weird shaky feeling I'd been having, initially it'd start when I was exercising, but at this point it was all the time. I knew that wasn't something to do with stress. I knew that this weird GI stuff that was still going on, there was enough unusual patterns within families. At that point, I think I emailed people that I don't remember. I literally have, I think, forgotten. Sometimes people will tell me, do you remember we talked about such and such during that time? And I'm like, I have no memory of it.
So who were the first people that you contacted where you actually started getting some of this data?
So I think the first people that I ever received any data from were neighbors and families who were also affected. And I'm seeking help. I'm asking other affected families about their symptoms. And it's really families pooling together to seek and try to find answers to what is happening to us. And really what was really astonishing, and it was multiple affected families of every rank, every branch, spouses, service members, military and civilian families affected that were coming together and trying to help figure out what are total petroleum hydrocarbons, what was in the jet fuel. So I like to tell people that those same people 3 years later, we now consider ourselves water friends. And we began helping each other seek deeper answers into why this effects of this were not going away for us. And so a few agency staffs were willing to answer basic questions, but it seemed there were so little answers to basic things we had. But we even began finding local Hawaiians who weren't even affected by the fuel. They cared so much, they would help research data and they would provide us information and answers. They would answer technical questions. They'd provide bottled water. And then experts around the island, we learned of their conversations or from a previous leak. You had the Ernie Lau and Erwin Kawada. I think of Hawaii Department of Health had some scientists who were willing to answer questions and teach us about total petroleum hydrocarbons. They were all helping. So the water friends, we just keep pooling together, putting together information that each of us may have gained separately, going to these meetings or asking scientists and different questions. Mm-hmm. And we, in the end, I would say 3 years later, it's taking affected families who wouldn't sit by and accept the narrative that the Navy was pushing because it contradicted the similar and persisting symptoms in multiple people of all ages, and what more and more of the data was showing as we were slowly getting information. So who helped along the way? It seems everyone was willing to help. except the Navy.
Ah, there it is. Except the people that should be. Bingo.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the tragedy in this.
Yes.
We still have so many unanswered questions and inconsistencies in the data, and our health and the health of our kids really depends on the whole truth. And these water friends, we're going to keep digging and pushing and asking for answers and asking for accountability. And I always tell people, and any military leader or government official I speak to, it shouldn't be this hard. You know that we drank jet fuel and many of us did not recover. So we'll just keep doing it. The water friends and all those that have supported and provided answers and not been willing to hide the information from us will just keep speaking out and asking questions until we get somewhere and get to the truth.
So I think the first time I heard any honest discussion about total petroleum hydrocarbon, which is what jet fuels contaminants they look for in the water, was Dr. Roger Brewer from the Hawaii Department of Health, who just explained to several spouses at a meeting, like, this is what we were looking for. This is what is allowed in the water. And this is what was at the time. This is where your water level was. And why was this the threshold? So there became a discussion of why was the threshold up until 2017 here. And now in 2021, the threshold had been moved up to here to how much jet fuel is allowed in the water. And then we drank a threshold that was 350 times what was safe. So I would think that Hawaii Department of Health was probably the first time I heard some information.
I'm going to interrupt you. For our viewers who can't see what you were just now doing, Kat was, I'm just going to throw some random numbers. Kat was basically describing that prior to 2019, I think you said, we'll say that
2017, I think.
17.
Don't quote me. Yeah.
The threshold was supposed to be, say, was listed as like, say, 100.
It was like 50 to 100 or something.
And then after threshold was like, say,
400.
But you realized from this briefing that you guys were drinking at a threshold of like 3,000.
At the November league, 350 times whatever 400
was the acceptable, quote unquote, acceptable threshold that was even still over almost 3 times higher than what it had been in 2017, even to start with.
Yeah, and nothing to do with anything having to do with stress. That is people drinking jet fuel, period. And what's interesting, Kat, about, and we'll get to more of the forensic work you do here after this, you have encapsulated and recapped basically everyone we have advised, the journey that you go on, because like you are a longtime military family, huge believer in the system, huge believer in the lie, which was we will take care of our people regardless of the cost. And you don't want to believe it when you're being betrayed. It's such a deep and fundamental moral injury when this service, this military that you have devoted the majority, if not your entire adult life to, who has said the whole time, we're going to take care of you, people are our most valuable asset, support the troops, etc., then not only poisons you, but lies about it, denies you health care that you're entitled to, just as an American, let alone a service member's family, and then starts to cover it up, showing that the true priority is not you, it's saving face and evading culpability. It is a sad pattern of behavior we just see all too often. So sorry to interject. Now you're getting some real answers because you're not taking it with the military. And Department of Health in Hawaii is being, it sounds like, very forthright and forthcoming about how much jet fuel, how much fuel you were drinking. All right, now walk us through your next actions.
I began asking questions then about where do I find those reports and where do those get reported? And again, at this point, there's, people are doing more work. You look at this website, this shows you. And I began noticing that the website would list dates of when the amounts were reported to Department of Health. But I began seeing these reports and how there would be months of lag time between when
a test sample, a water sample was collected, and when the Hawaii Department of Health was notified of the result.
And who at this time is doing the testing and sampling?
So from my understanding, and I'm just a spouse.
Nobody is just a spouse.
I
hate that.
There's a subcontractor that the Navy uses, AECOM or AECOM, who has staff who go out and take water samples. They then send those samples off to, at the time, were 2 labs on the mainland to test water samples, who then report those actual water tests back to AECOM, who then take the water test results and write a report and produce the numbers supposedly straight from those tests, produce those results to then turn over to regulators. I found some documents where they contended, and you'll have to, maybe rusty on the dates, but they had contended that they didn't need to test for 2-MeE, which is methyl ethyl exyl or something like that. It's the fuel system icing inhibitor, because they had shown how they'd had some number of years of it not showing up, so they shouldn't have to test for it anymore. But what I'm noticing, remember, there's a website now you can go and you can read the data, the actual reports, and look at them, is that there's a whole lot of months lag time between when they take a sample and when they turn it over to a regulator.
Just to clarify here, the process, just so I understand and everybody else does, is, as you understand it, Kat, the sampling is being done by a private firm who is subcontracted out by the U.S. Navy, who was responsible for the spill. And then that company, again, being paid by the Navy, they pay that company to take the samples, and then those samples are sent back to the mainland and back, and then the company prepares a report for regulators. Is that the system? Do I understand that?
And I tell you, this might help. Let me give you one sample explanation. This was in a Civil Beat article. A sample that was taken in late July, August 2021 exceeded the allowed environmental action levels. So they were required to report this. The allowed jet fuel, total hydrocarbons in the water had exceeded the safe level. A sample that was taken early August 5th, was not reported to Hawaii Department of Health until October. So 2 months. Now, the Navy is contending they reported it September 23rd. But again, I'll remind you, it's an exceedance, and the samples were taken in late July, August, and were not reported until the Navy claims September 23rd, but the Hawaii Department of Health claims October 19th.
And also, from what I understand, how you explained it, is that there could be other chemicals, particulates, toxins, etc., that aren't even being tested for because it's beholden to either the Navy or the subcontractor to test for certain things. And even there were some particulates that, because years past the tests were good, that they weren't even being monitored, like this 2-EE. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting the chemical,
2-MeE.
but 2-MeE, because there had been no presence prior to the spills, and therefore was not required to be tested anymore. So there was 2, maybe more issues going on. Number one was you had the Navy pulling the strings on the test. I think it's a familiar conflict of interest I've heard somewhere else.
Everywhere else.
Interesting. So that, and then not only is it, you've got that conflict of interest, you've got the delays, but you also have the tests that are being delayed for whatever reason, and or not testing for every potential toxin, particulate, chemical that could be harmful to the populace. Also true?
True, and let me caveat. They might have seen something on their water tests that came straight from the lab that they are not required to turn over to regulators.
Okay.
So if it's not a regulated contaminant,
it's probably not going to be published. Mm-hmm. Okay.
There were then further reports that came out by April. We found out through Hawaii Department of Health that there were reports of other exceedances throughout August of 2021 that took 6 to 8 months for the Hawaii Department of Health to be notified. And
wow.
I had emailed a different person at that point at Hawaii Department of Health and asked, because again, you see these reports and they come out in the news and you're saying, why didn't you, Hawaii Department of Health, help us and warn us? And they said, we didn't know. We did not receive this result for 6-8 months.
And again, that's a test sample taken 2 months prior to the officially admitted spill, right? So the Navy sticks to, there's a spill in November 2021, but the August results show that there was likely something before that. How? And I don't want you to try and answer for them, but this is a rhetorical question. How does the Navy reconcile that?
So I'm not sure I've heard the Navy. I do know, because I asked the Hawaii Department of Health, and the Hawaii Department of Health did follow up with the question I had. Is here they had reported documented cases of 6-8 months delayed in reports. And what did the Navy say? Why did they not provide you these results? Because this was the summer of 2021, and there are multiple tests of exceedance. And their response in an email was that the Navy stated that they had excessive delays at the labs. So the Navy said it's the labs that were the delays,
which are contracted out. So they're trying to take visibility off of the Navy itself.
The Navy claimed that those delayed reports were due to substantial delays at the labs, in quotes. Like, I began downloading every one of those reports at that point. I wanted to see what kind of delays are we talking about, and what kind of patterns. Is this a chronic problem, or is this a one-off problem? And so I ended up just basically downloading all of the reports that I could find. And I began looking at patterns and looking at how many are we talking about, average delays, because the reports show whether or not the lab completed testing on a date. So you have a firm date of when the lab tested. So I'm going to share with you on 8 tests that I looked at from just summer of 2021 into fall of 2021, before the November leak. The lab's average test time that they took to take a sample and finish testing a sample averaged more like less than 2 weeks. Okay. I'm going to read you the days between the last test run at the lab and when the reports were being issued. 220 days.
Oh my God.
27 days, 95 days, 143 days, 19 days, 24 days, 8 days, and 20 days. So you take that from when the lab first received them, and now we're talking months. And that is what Hawaii Department of Health was answering to me. The delays that they weren't receiving the reports because the Navy wasn't turning them over. But when I look back and look through, and I think it ends up being 130 reports, 125 maybe, the averages were something like 17 days from the time a sample received at the lab to when it was completed testing at the lab. But the average time for the report to be issued, it was something like 80 days.
And this is also, in terms of the context of the situation, there is a major natural disaster health crisis ongoing where the people and the families of the Navy and the local community are being sickened by this. And everyone seemingly in the government is okay accepting this 3-month turnaround on getting what are pretty critical results, right?
Yes, I would say are alarming results. So here's what I concluded. The delays in those reports were not due to the labs.
And by that you mean when it goes from the lab back to the U.S. Navy, that's where the delay was occurring? Okay.
Yes. So what they are telling the Hawaii Department of Health, I'm arguing is wrong. That's not true. The data shows from May until the November leak, the delays were due to the Navy and their subcontractor, AECOM.
So this is from the DODIG investigation. So, quote, "We asked Navy officials why they were not testing for free product in the Red Hill well. According to a written response we received from NAVFAC officials, The groundwater monitoring procedure included a step for, quote, free product gauging, unquote. However, a modification was made to the sampling procedure for the Red Hill well. According to Navy officials, the oil-water interface meter used to test for free product during groundwater monitoring is, quote, typically rented equipment by the sampling contractor. This is still the response from the Navy. In the past, the rented equipment would have noticeable and very strong hydrocarbon odors from past users by other renters at different sites, unquote. So basically, the Navy is not going to test because if we test, we'll poison people. It's like, what?
Yes, and not only that, we're okay with that. We're just not going to test.
Right. And the irony of this is that you have a person who the DoD will not even provide medical care to in a pop-up white tent outside of a facility. A single person, Kat, who is able to find out this data all on her own and collate and analyze and put together all this data on all these failures. And yet the DoDIG, with all of its investigatory authorities and power and people and hundreds of thousands of dollars that's being put towards them every year, is completely absent.
I found it striking that the response that the DoDIG accepted, being the Navy's lapdog, was a written one that seemingly no one was interviewed, just as Shannon was not interviewed, just as other experts and eyewitnesses were not interviewed in that quote-unquote thorough and exhaustive 3-year investigation.
Exactly. Kat, one of the things that you mentioned, I think in an email, was that you have toxin-induced Parkinson's disease.
Doctors who first finally did some tissue biopsying found I have small fiber neuropathy, which they can't figure out why I would have. I don't have any indicators for having it. Some toxicologists believe it may be one of the early biological markers of Red Hill. They're calling mine atypical onset. And I learned this throughout this tragedy and all my symptoms is that atypical onset means the neurologist was referring to it that way. High majority of people who have Parkinson's have a decade or two of these subtle symptoms that go and keep continually getting worse and worse. And then they get a secondary symptom and then a third symptom. And by the time they get to neurologists, they really can answer this questionnaire we were given. And I was a no to every single question until November of 2021. All of my symptoms came on within 2-3 months of Red Hill. And that's what they're calling atypical onset. I know so many people with tremors, with balance issues, had nystagmus, had the pain, and still have pain and numbness and coldness to extremities, all of these type of symptoms.
You know, everything you just now listed out is so utterly heartbreaking because mistakes happen. Fuel spills occur. That is not the crime. The real crime is the fact that the Navy and the Department of Defense, with the Department of Defense IG as its lapdog, intentionally covered up these accidents, these mistakes for months, if not probably years even.
Years.
Given the research that use a lone person, a civilian who will not even, quote unquote, civilian who will not even be seen by the medical people in white tents, are able to put together this data, and you are personally impacted, as well as children who now have permanent neurological damage and others. And that's just the physical. It's not even accounting for the mental impact, that the mental health impact to you and to others who have felt this, who've experiencing the betrayal, plus the betrayal of the system and also the betrayal of their bodies, where they can no longer do the things that they were able to do before.
Yep.
So on behalf of our organization, our foundation, Ryan, myself, I mean, my gosh, thank you so much for your courage to come forward, not just to speak about this, but to also just sit there and do this work. I mean, my God.
That the IG should have done.
Should have done.
If I could say anything, is prevent the continued suffering of those who lived through November 20th and prevent it from happening to the next group of families that
live out a tragedy like that. And that's what real leadership would show.
Couldn't have said it better ourselves.
Thank you so much for giving families and giving me the time today to share more about Red Hill.
So we've talked about the disaster, what occurred, why it occurred, leadership failures, ignoring people who are experts and hand-selected for these positions, et cetera, et cetera. And now talk to Shannon and Mandy about their personal and professional impacts that occurred as a result of you blowing the whistle. And I think we'll start with Shannon. So what has happened to you since you blew the whistle 40 or 50 times prior to these disasters occurring? And what's happened to you since then?
Yeah, good question. So I'll be quick with this, but I was fired twice by my captain and done illegally. They moved me around the island up to a year as a temporary assignment to the Marine Corps. And then I failed to promote twice because the officers that sit my board are also involved in this controversy as supply officers. You know, the lead chief of Supply Corps right now, who assigns those officers for the boards, actually was assigned to the command in which ruled over Red Hill back in 2014. And during that, there was another leak at that time. So I continue to be reprised against and non-promoted because the officers in the Navy control my career.
And I'm sure the narrative is that you're continuing to be non-promoted because you're a troublemaker, or because maybe you didn't perform very well, even though, as we covered on, you have a long history of being hand-selected for some of the toughest jobs in the Navy.
Absolutely. So my captain at the time, after he found out I filed the Inspector General report, filed an adverse fitness report error evaluation on me. First one ever in my career, saying, again, I was a dirtbag, and that after he said I was awesome for the whole almost year that I had worked for him, and that essentially I refused to sign the evaluation. So he sent it directly to my record and I never saw it.
Oh, wow.
And it is allowable by the commanding officer.
You Navy guys, I use that general term, Navy guys, sailors, have a great system. When I say great system, it's very masterfully devised to protect the head of the snake, isn't it? You got to report a wrongdoing you're filing on someone to that someone first, and then when they retaliate, they can hide that record from you. It's quite genius, evil genius.
We'll keep that. So keep
don't start copying it, Army. Now the Army and Air Force are like, oh, we can do that too.
So Mandy, what's happened to you since you blew the whistle? And I don't have a very good sense of what you blew the whistle on. So can you kind of walk us through that as well?
Yeah, so let's quickly talk about that. You know, when the crisis first happened, I immediately went to my senior leadership. My advocacy began because we were stationed on Ford Island, historic Ford Island, and my kids were at the Ford Island CDC, which was the largest child development center on base, on the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam water system. And we were receiving all of the initial notifications from the base commander that there's no indication that your water's not safe. We're still drinking the water. My staff and I are still drinking the water. But then days later, we get this email, we being the parents of the children that were in the CDCs, that, hey, we've been offering your children clean water, an alternate water source since the 29th of November. And I knew that wasn't true because I just dropped my kids off. And oh, by the way, if you read the OIG reports, which I know we all have, the Navy was only initially providing clean water for 6 of the 26 or 29 neighborhoods in the beginning. And Ford Island was not one of them.
Oh, wow.
And so my initial advocacy became for getting clean water to the Ford Island CDC, which, you know, housed or cared for 250 plus children, plus all the staff there. All these kids are under the age of 5, including my 2 little ones. And, you know, we're older parents. You know, I had some infertility issues when I got back from Afghanistan. Both my kids came from, you know, infertility treatments. We lost a baby along the way. I don't tell you that to say that I love my kids any more than anyone else, but we brought healthy kids there. And my sole job and my biggest privilege as, you know, as a mother is to protect my children. And when I was dropping my kids off, who were 1 and 3, most parents who are the parents of 1 and 3-year-olds are much junior to me and much younger than my 40 plus, old husband and I. And I remember being that young and I didn't know my resources. I hadn't found my voice yet. I didn't know what my options were. And I felt this, conviction to speak up and say, hey, we're not getting clean water to these kids. Furthermore, we're not replacing personal use plastics in these child development centers, meaning sippy cups and teething toys and the utensils that we use to make their food. And why that became so important to me is that when I took my children to the ER after we were exposed and after my entire family ended up in the hospital, I was told by a provider, hey, Mom, when did you guys stop drinking the water? And I let them know it had been days prior. Okay, well, hey, Mom, is that sippy cup, was that previously washed, in your home? And absolutely, yeah, I've had this thing for years. Well, hey, Mom, you might actually be poisoning your own child.
So the jet fuel had leached onto the plastics that you were using to take care of your children.
Yes. And so I didn't want any other parent to ever have to experience those words, to ever, the Navy really played on our ignorance. And I started this by saying, a couple of episodes ago, I am not a fuels expert. I didn't know anything about fuel. I didn't know that fuel leached on to personal use plastics, most of which are in our kitchens and what we use to, nourish our children.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my biggest advocacy. And I spoke up to the DHA commander at the time who said, hey, Major Fight, we would hope that you wash these things out and then give it the old smell test. And, if it smells like it, do another wash or wash it out with Dial soap. I remember we wrote Dial. We wrote them and they wrote back to us and said, we actually have never tested our products on fuel, and we don't stand by that. But the DHA commander, Major General Place at the time said, give it the old smell test and, taste it. And I thought to myself, do you think that my 1-year-old has the vocabulary to tell his teacher, Miss Sam, who was responsible for 20 kids, hey, Miss Sam, this teething toy, the sippy cup tastes like fuel? What, the amount of common sense that was placed to this is mind blowing. But so going back to your original question, my advocacy began with transparency, getting clean water to all of our child development centers on the Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM water supply system. And then it became, if I didn't say this, sorry, getting all of these things replaced, which took forever. And then it became about medical care, medical testing, medical treatment, getting people clean water, all neighborhoods on the Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM water system, clean water, not just a couple of neighborhoods. I met with very senior leaders and I said, why are we only supplying water to these 6 neighborhoods when all of us are, well, are you basing that off of testing? And the answer was no, they were basing it off of call-ins. And so they were...
Whoever complains the loudest?
Whoever complains the loudest, the amount of calls is who they were saying was the impacted areas. And so, I'll never forget, I had met with the deputy base commander and the chief of staff and the MWR folks, morale, welfare, and recreation folks who were in charge of the CDCs on a Friday, December 10th, I believe it was. And that weekend, my family ended up in the hospital. And by Monday, I called and I said, I know that you guys were at my house testing my water. And I know that you've tested the child development centers. And today, my kids are in the hospital. I want to know what those test results are. And they told me on that day, Major Fight, you can file a FOIA request for those test results just like anyone else can. For the water test results in the home that I was living in and the daycare facility that was on base for my children, there was no, you can read the DOJ, there was no effort to protect human health, and there was a total lack of transparency. And from then on, I made multiple complaints. I've gone to Congress multiple times. I talked to the Special Operations Command community about that because that's where I was serving in a nominative position. The Fort Island CDC, I talked to the Secretary of the Navy. I'd love to discuss that at some point. I've met with the Secretary of the Army and their team. I obviously spoke with the DODIG, multiple complaints. And just like Shannon, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but well, let's talk about this. So Shannon and I both were serving at the time in a nominative position, right? So we didn't get there by batting our eyes. We earned our spot there. And I had served, just like Shannon, I had served in that position for a little over a year prior to the water crisis. And in the special operations community, it's a small, tight-knit, close community, and where everyone's on first basis. We were, I attended every unit event. I was very close with my commander. I'd go on hikes with his wife. And I was in good standing. And like Shannon, I hate this quote, but you go from hero to zero overnight. And I was getting negative counseling statements. I received 2 subpar evaluations. I was in the zone for promotion to lieutenant colonel. And obviously I'm still major today, which tells you that I've been, like Shannon, passed over for promotion to lieutenant colonel twice. I received a security clearance violation for my conversation with the Secretary of the Navy. I left the unit on a compassionate reassignment because our family was so sick. We had evacuated our home and been shuffled between 7 different hotels for over 3 months. And I wrote the Secretary of the Army and I said, ma'am, I can't do this. My family is so sick. To date, as we speak today, my family's been to over 600 medical appointments.
Oh my God.
Multiple surgeries. I've had to put my children under for multiple procedures 9 times. I'm in a soldier recovery unit, still on active duty, but my job is to seek medical care. But I left this unit, Special Operations Command Pacific, on a compassionate reassignment, again, no fault of my own, for the first time in my career without a PCS award. And each of these things, so subpar evaluations, no PCS awards, all of these things send a signal. They're a way that we administratively retaliate against people. It's how we get away with it. Mm-hmm. Each of these send a signal to the board because they all equal promotion points and you're compared to your peers. And it leads people to wonder, like, yeah, these aren't awful. Like we didn't, fire you. We didn't actually put that in there. We didn't put what actually happened, but they're just written so casually and they don't have any quantitative or qualitative data in it. And they end up, as a result, you are administratively
blackballed.
The velvet dagger.
Yep, you're blackballed. And I think this actually is a good point to talk about your discussion with Secretary Del Toro. That discussion specifically, but then also more broadly, and we'll ask this question of both of you. We'll start with you, Mandy, is, who should have helped you along the way and who didn't help you along the way? Who actively actually attacked you in a way?
I'll answer that question first. Who did help? No one from the military helped me. I had to file for Department of Defense whistleblower protection. I'm using air quotes for those who can't see. And what I learned very quick is that filing for that protection doesn't really protect you from anything.
No, it does not.
What I've learned about the DoD IG and its policies and the way that they are currently written is they are written in a way to protect the command. All the while, Shane and I have both submitted, we've been the only 2 folks who have been whistleblowers on this side of things and have submitted complaints. And both of us, I'm coming up on 3 years. I know Shannon's is longer than mine and not been adjudicated yet. And all this while, we're stuck. The person who has the intestinal fortitude to come forward and make an honest complaint and go through the hours and hours of interrogation where you're kind of put on, you're the one that's saying, this is a problem, raising the red flag. This is a matter of public health and safety, which is covered under the DoD whistleblower complaint. And you're stuck in this purgatory. There's no one there to help you. There's no one assigned to make sure, you just keep on sending these things to the DoD IG but no one comes and helps you at all. So who helps you? You have to hire your own civilian attorneys and you are held in this purgatory for me, I'll speak for myself, for nearly 3 years. And you get to watch the folks, because of the way that the regulations are written, you get to watch the folks while this DoD whistleblower complaint is not adjudicated. They get to retire with their careers intact. They're not held up, right? Mm-hmm. They're not stuck in sort of purgatory. They can move on with their career. They get awarded, right? Because there's been no adjudication. You're not a proven retaliator, right? Mm-hmm. So you can retire, you can get your award, you can promote, you can lead the unit with a wonderful evaluation. You can pin on another star like Major General Rudd, now Lieutenant General Rudd, who was the SOCPAC Special Operations Command Pacific commander at the time, who oversaw my whistleblower issues. I complained to him multiple times, let him know what was happening to me within the unit. He has now pinned another star and is the deputy commander for Indo-Pacific Command. Mm-hmm. These people get to move on with their lives and with their careers while the whistleblowers are stuck in this purgatory. And you're left feeling the weight of that, which is the institutional betrayal and the moral injury of all of this, and the sense of being betrayed and left behind by an organization that you have literally risked your life for and dedicated your life to. And you're made to feel, though a huge patriot of the country, and I know Shannon is too, an enemy of your country. You have a target placed on your back, and the weight of all of that is really heavy. Mm-hmm. It is it's been one of the most, obviously seeing my family go through what they've been through. It's been hard, but this is very personal to me. I've dedicated a lot of my entire adult life to the military. And like I said, earlier, I've loved it. And this has been extremely hurtful.
So Mandy, with all that being said, I'm at the point now in doing this where I don't use the word unbelievable anymore because it's all believable now. But it still stuns me and shocks me that a military and really a country that says we support our troops, people are our most valuable resource, thank you for your service and sacrifice, still can, in a blink of an eye, turn on people like this. It will forever disgust me. Mm-hmm. So you going through this now 3-year purgatory, let's say you're given an opportunity to travel back in time to 2021 and visit Mandy Feint 2021 version. What do you tell her?
I would tell her to buckle up. It's going to be a really rough, really hard ride. Nothing, I don't mean to get emotional. I'm sorry.
You don't need to be sorry.
I apologize for getting emotional. I would tell her to buckle up. It's going to be a long, hard road. Nothing prepared me for this. I think I told you in the beginning, I'm a master resiliency trainer in the military. I come equipped with a big tool bag of how to get through really tough stuff. And as a female in the military, I've been through some pretty harsh stuff, but nothing compares to this. The fact that, I was evacuated from our home and I was taking care of a family, a very sick family. And I was trying to protect my family, and I was trying, I'd been an outspoken advocate for not only my family, but my brothers and sisters in arms and their kids too, our military kids. And that the immediate response was, instead of helping you through this, let me retaliate against you. Let me add a little bit more weight, as if I needed, that's what they thought I needed in that situation. Our motto in the military, people are our greatest asset, right? This was one of those situations where we could put our money where our mouth is, right. But we allowed this military asset, this fuel facility, this military grade jet fuel, to actually be the greatest asset over people's lives. And don't take my word for it. You can read the IG report that says the Navy failed to protect human health. Thousands of our actual people.
And what was Secretary Del Toro's response to you?
Yeah, so I hope that we'll play the video of the first time Secretary of the Navy Del Toro came to the island, where he said it's not the fuel that's making people sick, it's the fuel in the water that's making people sick, which obviously there was public outrage of that statement. And so they tried to hide Del Toro the next time he came into town, and I had gotten word that he was going to be in town. I didn't know where he was going to be. I tried to talk to some of my congressional contacts. I had called our public affairs officer that morning, and I said, hey, I know he's going to be here. I already know. I'd like to speak to him. As an outspoken advocate now for thousands of families, I want to let him know what the human impact is. Mm-hmm. From a mom and as a service member. We don't know, Major Feint, yada, yada, yada. Well, Special Operations Command is headquartered in the Indo-Pacific headquarters. And I happened to work in that building. And while I was on lunch, I saw these black motorcade vehicles pull up. And one of the people that had walked in was Senator Schatz, who is a Hawaii senator. And the person I had filed my first congressional complaint with. And that pretty much signaled to me that he was going to be in the Indo-PACOM headquarters. So later on that day, I'd come back out, and by divine intervention, he had come out of the building, and we had a conversation. I recorded him coming out of the building. I was not in a secure, in the building, but I told that story. I told him what was going on, the transparency issues, how my family had been impacted. I asked him, would you allow your grandson, because he was a new grandparent at the time, would you allow your grandson to drink this water? And he said, Major Feint, I want to tell you something. He said, I'm sorry for what's happened to your family, but nothing in life is pure.
Oh my God.
That was Del Toro talking?
Del Toro said that to me.
Nothing in life is pure.
Nothing in life is pure. So after that, I had made a habit of, a conversation with the Secretary of the Navy, like the person that's, overall in charge of this. I didn't think it was fair that I held on to that conversation. This crisis impacted so many thousands of others. And so I contacted our local news and I shared that story. And I shared the recording of him walking outside of the building, again, not in a secure area. And I now know, because I have all of the emails from the Secretary of the Navy's office, because we went through a court case, that I was being targeted and that they wanted to run an investigation to confirm who exactly recorded the video of him coming out. And I went through this long, again, I'm leaving the island in a compassionate reassignment while this is happening. That got held up, and I received a security clearance, a violation for recording a military building, an unauthorized recording of a military building.
Good. Perfect. Laws schmaws, baby. Doesn't matter.
And in an area where we do several promotion ceremonies, where the Secretary of Defense had just walked in a few weeks later in the exact same area that was on the news. We do several socials and gatherings in that, area outside of the building. And because the news report and the things that he said to me, I guess, made the Secretary of the Navy look bad, or because he was exposed now for being on an island and not facing the community that had been impacted, it was one of those found in contempt and they were going to go after me situations.
So we're still back in time in this ridiculous scenario. In every whistleblower's journey, there's that critical juncture at which you say, I have exhausted every potential avenue of recourse at the lowest level within the chain, etc. And I can either just accept that nothing's going to happen, or I can elevate and at a exponentially higher level, right? It's the nuclear option, quote unquote, the press, Congress, the department's inspector general system, etc. Mandy, you probably saw this maybe more than Shannon with the other people who were going through similar issues who elected to go the route of the former, which is, you know what? I see it. It's wrong. But what the hell? Nothing's ever going to change. I'll just accept it and move on with life. You didn't do that, right? You didn't stand for the corruption and the cover-up and the impropriety. And once you commit down that path, there's really no going back. You, I'm sure, lived and worked with people who just saw it and turned a blind eye, or just buried their head in the sand, or they just said, you know what, I'm not going to try anything because I'm just going to get crushed and nothing's going to change. Going back, would you do everything the same? Would you commit to the path you have committed on? And if not, what would you do differently?
I've been asked this question many of times. Would you go back? Would you do it again? Do you regret it? I'd probably be a lieutenant colonel right now and live in life just like all these other folks who did bury their hand in the sand and who did shut up in color. The answer is absolutely not. Like, I wouldn't do anything different. I am disappointed with the way that the IG has handled this specifically, and I've talked to Shannon about this. I know that she shares this feeling, is that I didn't really learn a whole lot from the IG reports, to be completely honest with you. The only thing the IG reports did for me is it no longer was my word. And I use me as a representative for the impacted families. It was no longer our word against the Navy. You had this third party entity that came in and they basically proved everything that we already knew, which was, they didn't maintain their facility. They didn't follow their own rules. They didn't follow laws that required them to provide clean water and provide proper notification and to take care of their own people. We already knew that. So that was, I guess, vindicating. But what's frustrating is the accountability piece. And that's why I continue to speak up. And I've said, life has been hell for the past 3 years. It's been really heavy beyond my personal things that I've gone through as a mother. But I refuse to be quiet to not stop talking about this, because it's too important. The risk to people's lives is too important here. This will be the next Camp Lejeune. I flew out to Camp Lejeune, and if you've not watched the Camp Lejeune documentary. I encourage that you do, and hopefully we can talk about that here. But I was given a tour of the base, and I saw the housing where people were impacted, and then I was taken to this graveyard. And I knew exactly where I was when we arrived. It was this piece of land that the state of North Carolina had given to families who had buried their children after they were impacted by the Camp Lejeune water crisis. And I stood in that graveyard as a mother of young children, and I looked at what our reality was if we did not continue this fight, what our reality would be if we just shut up and colored, if we just buried our head in the sand. It is too important. This fight has been too important. And until there's accountability, until there is an actual priority placed on human health and being proactive with the health of the people that have been impacted by this crisis, no, I won't stay silent, and I won't continue fighting this fight.
That's a great answer. And now I'm going to ask Shannon a similar question, but in a different context. Shannon, we fast forward 20 years in the future, and your son or daughter serving, and they're faced with a similar situation as you were 20 years in the past. What do you tell your child who's making this very much career and personal life impacting decision? What advice do you give them?
Oh, that's easy. I wouldn't let them join the military to begin with.
Bam. Solid.
Boom.
Yep. And I'm glad you said that. That was not a softball question by any means, but we talked in a few episodes ago about the trust gap that the military is suffering from, and you can see it by the number of people, the number of veterans specifically, who are recommending service to their children now is approaching post-Vietnam level lows at 65%. There's a reason for that. And you just articulated it perfectly, which is after you've seen what you've seen, and I'll say the same is true for myself, I would never recommend a child to go in the military. I would never trust the welfare or their welfare to an institution so hell-bent on self-protection. So I think that's a brilliant answer. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of touch on a couple of things. Again, the facility's been leaking since the 40s. So it's not 93,000 people affected. It's everybody that's gone through this area of the whole Joint Base Pearl Harbor since, decades ago, 80 years ago. So still working on getting that out there, that new messaging that the Navy should be reiterating. And then this is the other thing. I was kind of put in a separate situation where the Navy thought they were retaliating me and sent me to go work for the Marines at Marine Corps Base Hawaii. So if you know anything about the Navy and the Marines, they don't get along. Actually, the Marines despise the Navy. So they actually loved having me over there. And I was overseeing a field facility over on their side of the island. And what the IG report really doesn't really put on the front page is that it's all the field facilities. All the field facilities are jacked up. All the field facilities aren't maintained. They all share the same contractors with the same corrupted, ex-retired Navy officers that run the show. And so what the Marine Corps did differently was they listened to me and they allowed me to fix the facilities under their control up to the entire Marine Corps and expose the issues and the corruption. And we tried to exterminate it on that end. So in turn, the Navy inadvertently made me a more of a fuels expert through the Marine Corps.
All while your 4 years long reprisal investigation sat stalled with the DoD IG.
Well, at least one service got it right, I guess. And I would have said at this point, that ends the Red Hill saga. But as luck or something else would have it, as we were recording, the DoD IG released their report of investigation regarding Shannon's complaints of whistleblower reprisal. The result of that years-long investigation?
Dun, dun, dun.
To the shock of no one, not substantiated. Of course, this comes from the same entity that held literally 0 Navy officers to account for the events of Red Hill, so the unsubstantiation should come as little to no surprise to anyone at this point. And alas, Shannon's case becomes a part of that unavoidable truth, the abhorrent statistic, which is the DOD-IG's 98% unsubstantiation rate.
Which is insane. It's totally
It's insane. It's actually mathematically impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Red Hill saga, save for what I'm sure will be the years-long suits to follow. And what an incredible story this has been and still is. We've heard recounts from some incredibly brave Americans doing some incredibly courageous things. Shannon, Mandy, and Kat all risking and sacrificing to ensure transparency, accountability, and ultimately safety for everyone and those who will come after them.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the irony and hypocrisy that this case seethes with, perhaps the grandest of them all is that the only people who paid a professional price, and really personal and psychological price as well, were those brave people who did the right thing. And then you have on the other side the U.S. Navy's leadership and their court jesters, the Department of Defense Inspector General system, showing their true colors in this scandal, which I could not better encapsulate than with the DOD-IG's own words from their report, which of course took 3 years and was not released until after the presidential elections. Recommendation 1. We recommend that the Secretary of the Navy, ... conduct a comprehensive review of the Navy's response to the incidents. This review should include a determination of whether the response, reporting, and cleanup for the incidents identified complied with federal and state of Hawaii laws. In short, after an exhaustive 3 years long investigation, the DOD-IG's number one recommendation was for the Navy to investigate itself to determine if any laws were broken. Independent watchdog turned institution's lapdog, enshrined in their very own words. Questions? See you next episode, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.